The stars are right, and that means it's time for another episode of The Whisper in Darkness. I'm your host, the Man from Lang. Thank you very much for joining me today. On this episode, I am kicking off my review of Black Star's Rise, the 5th Mythos pack in the Path to Carcosa cycle, with a look at the Guardian cards. Now, before I begin, I'd just like to make a quick note about the channel. I'm going on vacation for 3 weeks once I post this batch of reviews, and I won't be able to post during that time. However, I will be back in mid-April with my review of the Dim Carcosa, the final Mythos pack in the Path to Carcosa cycle. And I'm also hoping to wrap up my Lola Hayes and Safina Rousseau campaigns, as well as post several new episodes in the Know series, which was very well received by viewers, and thank you very much for all the feedback I received on that. So there's a lot to look forward to as we get ready for the release of The Forgotten Age, the third deluxe expansion, which should be coming out. I'd probably expect it before the summer. As always, I've split up this review into 5 parts, so make sure that you check out the reviews for the cards in the other classes when you have the chance. There are spoilers throughout if you care about that sort of thing. If you enjoy what you hear, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. There are two Guardian cards in this pack that open up a lot of new possibilities for the class. So let's get started. The first Guardian card in the pack is On the Hunt. It's a 1-cost event with intellect and combat skill icons and the tactic trait. It has the game text Fast. Play when you would draw an encounter card during the Mythos phase. Instead, search the top 9 cards of the encounter deck for an enemy, spawn it engaged with you instead of its normal spawn location, and shuffle the encounter deck. If you cannot, draw the top card of the encounter deck. All of the classes seem to be receiving cards this cycle that interact with the encounter deck in some way. Seekers and Survivors, of course, picked up Forewarned and a Test of Will, respectively, in the Unspeakable Oath, while Mystics get level 2 Ward of Protection in this very pack. Could On the Hunt be the Guardian's take on Treachery Cancellation? On the Hunt isn't Treachery Cancellation per se, since you play it before you draw the top card of the encounter deck. But you've got to admit that it's a very Guardian-esque approach to avoiding a Treachery. You have to take an enemy if possible instead, but given the choice between drawing a Frozen in Fear, Rotting Remains, or an enemy, I think most Guardians would gladly take an enemy. Hell, Schizo Duo would also... who can also include this card in his deck, would also probably prefer an enemy to either of those cards in most circumstances. If you're playing multiplayer, On the Hunt also has a very subtle effect on investigators who happen to be packing cards such as Forewarned, a Test of Will, and Ward of Protection. If you're pulling enemies out of the encounter deck with On the Hunt, your fellow investigators have a slightly better chance of pulling treacheries, which they may cancel with those cards, rather than enemies which they cannot. I really like On the Hunt because it gives Guardian investigators unprecedented control over the board state. It's an equal opportunity enemy tutor. You can grab any enemy, regardless of whether it's elite or non-elite, when you search the top 9 cards. The enemy also spawns engaged with the investigator, which is great for those mobility-challenged Guardians who don't have access to cards such as Shortcut and Pathfinder. There's nothing worse than having to waste precious actions chasing down an enemy and engaging it because the hapless seeker happened to wander off to some far-flung location. On the Hunt brings the fight to you on your terms and potentially saving you a handful of actions in the process. And I don't think that the power of that sort of control can be underestimated. You can even use this card to pull an aloof enemy out of the encounter deck, since On the Hunt, its game text forces the enemy to spawn engaged with you rather than unengaged. Those whippoorwills from the Dunwich Legacy don't exactly qualify as big game, but if you can take them out before they have a chance to form a whirlpool, that being multiple whippoorwills at the same location, That's just all the better. On the Hunt also ensures the Guardian player has something to do in multiplayer. Sometimes the Guardian player is forced to sit around and twiddle his or her thumbs while waiting for an enemy to appear. A Guardian such as ZOEY Samarath doesn't have much to do during a scenario unless there are enemies around. She's certainly not going to be doing much investigating with an intellect of 2, especially if all the cards in her deck are focused on murdering enemies as efficiently as possible, rather than investigation. On the Hunt lets ZOEY take the fight to the Mythos, as is befitting her Hunter trait. This could come in extremely handy depending on the enemies in the encounter deck. If there is one particular enemy that could wreck your group if it is allowed to run amok, the Guardian can try to pull it from the encounter deck before it can create havoc. Don't forget that Roland, ZOEY, and William each have abilities that trigger based on interactions with enemies. Roland can play on the Hunt if he's stuck at a high shroud location to get himself out of a jam. If he can grab a weak enemy from the encounter deck, kill it, and trigger his response, he can snag a clue, regardless of the location's shroud value. And William York can certainly pull the same kind of trick if he needs to return an asset from his discard pile. If your Guardian is a lean, mean killing machine, you could also use On the Hunt to go fishing for victory points. If you're playing a scenario such as The House Always Wins or Where Doom Awaits, for example, there is no guarantee that you're going to see either the Servant of the Lurker or the Crazed Shoggoth. The Crazed Shoggoth in particular can be a tricky enemy to bag due to its spawn instruction. On the Hunt improves the odds of earning those victory points, which may give you enough to buy that lightning gun that you've always wanted. On the Hunt is also an interesting card because the other Guardian cards that we've seen in this cycle start to make some sense. One of the biggest concerns I had with Ambush, a Guardian event from the Unspeakable Oath, for example, was that Guardians didn't have a good way of rigging the encounter deck to ensure they drew an enemy at the right time to trigger that ambush. On the Hunt solves that problem very nicely. Now a Guardian can attach ambush to his or her location, confident in the knowledge that he or she will be able to draw an enemy during the next Mythos phase. And that's really some great synergy. On the Hunt may be the missing piece of the puzzle for a big game hunter style of Guardian deck. Take ZOEY Samarath, for example. If you include On the Hunt, Ambush, and Mano a Mano from the Pallid Mask in a deck, you can pull an enemy from the encounter deck, deal 2 damage to it with Ambush, exhaust ZOEY's Cross and spend 1 resource to deal another damage to it, and then follow it up with a mano as your first action for another point of direct damage. That's 4 damage, and ZOEY still has 2 actions remaining to hack away at the enemy with her machete or shoot it in the face with her lightning gun. Bagging a trophy such as the Crazed Shoggoth is much easier if it has taken 3 or even 4 damage before the Guardian has really taken all of their actions. The idea of pulling an enemy from the encounter deck with On the Hunt may seem like a crazy idea at first, but I think this card will give certain investigators a lot more control over the pace of a scenario than in the past. Investigators no longer need to spin their wheels while they wait for an enemy to appear. They can hunt them down before they have the potential to cause trouble, which is fantastic, especially in multiplayer. Ultimately, a card like On the Hunt makes investigators more efficient, since they don't need to waste actions tracking down and engaging enemies that spawn at distant locations or engaged with other investigators. Playing On the Hunt also improves the efficiency of those investigators, since they can spend less time ducking those enemies and more time investigating. I think On the Hunt is really a win-win in those types of situations, and I think you're going to see a lot of Guardians and a few non-Guardians such as Skids O'Toole and William York take a really long hard look at this card during deck building. The second card in the pack is also a huge game changer for the Guardian class. This is Stick to the Plan. It's a permanent with the exceptional keyword, so it's going to set you back a whopping 6 experience points. It has the talent trait and the response trigger. Before you draw your opening hand, search your deck for up to 3 different tactic and or supply events, and attach them to stick to the plan. Shuffle your deck. Cards attached to stick to the plan may be played as if they were in your hand. As an additional cost to play an attached card, exhaust stick to the plan. Wow. Simply wow. I haven't been overly impressed with many of the Guardian cards that have been released this cycle, but this is nothing short of outstanding. It's going to open up so many possibilities for Roland Banks, ZOEY Samaras, and Mark Harrigan, not only now, but also in the future as more tactic and supply cards are printed, that it's difficult, if not impossible, to really cover them all in a 5 or 10 minute review. It's worth noting that Lola Hayes can also purchase Stick to the Plan, but there isn't much point since she can't trigger its response. Lola doesn't choose her first roll until after she's drawn her opening hand, which is long after the window to trigger Stick to the Plan has passed. So let's take a look at the supply cards, since there are only 5 options at the moment. Emergency Cash and its level 2 and level 3 upgrades, extra ammunition, and Contraband, the rogue event which was released in the Miskatonic Museum. Emergency Cash is an obvious choice for Guardians who have a lot of expensive assets that they would like to play. Starting the game with a copy of extra ammunition on Stick to the Plan is great for those investigators who prefer guns to the machete. A 45 automatic with 7 ammo is a pretty sweet deal, and I don't think I have to tell you that a lightning gun with 6 ammo is really going to be a force to be reckoned with during a scenario. ZOEY is the only investigator of the 3 who can take Contraband, but Stick to the Plan almost makes that card playable, I think. Now don't get me wrong, I still think Contraband is horrifically expensive at 4 resources, but if you attach it to Stick to the Plan along with a copy of Emergency Cash, at least you can guarantee to see it when you need it, giving you a better chance of maximizing the value you get from playing it. You should also have the resources to play it if you've also attached that Emergency Cash. Stick to the Plan also lets you get away with playing a single copy of Contraband in your ZOEY deck, which is a pretty big deal when you've only got 5 out-of-class card slots to play around with during deck building. Stick to the Plan, you can just put in 1 copy of Contraband and you're guaranteed to see it. If you need more ammo, you're probably better off just playing extra ammunition. Contraband doesn't cost any experience though, and it's slightly more versatile since you can target useful assets that use supplies, such as the flashlight, liquid courage, and smoking pipe. So Contraband does have that going for it. That brings us to the tactic cards. There are currently 10 Guardian cards with the Tactics trait. 2 in particular I'd like to single out, those being Prepared for the Worst from Blood on the Altar and Ever Vigilant from the Path to Carcosa, are very tempting targets to attach to Stick to the Plan. The biggest beef that I had with Ever Vigilant is that you really need to see it early if you want it to help you during setup. And Stick to the Plan solves that problem nicely, since once again you only need 1 copy of Ever Vigilant, and if it's on Stick to the Plan, you're guaranteed to see it. And if you play an Emergency Cash before the Ever Vigilant, then you know you've got the resources to pay for those 3 assets. That said, there are plenty of other tactic cards in the Guardian class that you could drop on Stick to the Plan depending on the scenario. I think Teamwork may be a really interesting option in multiplayer, while Dynamite Blast may be worth a look if you know that you're going to face a boss at the end of the scenario and you need to do some damage, or possibly if you expect to be swarmed by enemies, you know, having that Dynamite Blast on Stick to the Plan would be very nice to know that you've got it. Now Mark Harrigan has a few more options to consider, since he can play level 0 tactic cards from any class. Personally, I'm a big fan of Elusive and Shortcut. Elusive has really been an all-star in many scenarios during the Path to Carcosa cycle, and I would jump at the opportunity to start with an Elusive in my hand at the start of the Unspeakable Oath or the Pallid Mask, for example. Now, I'm going to play devil's advocate here for a moment. As enthusiastic as I am about Stick to the Plan, and if I haven't made it clear by now, I'm extremely enthusiastic about this card's potential to shake up Guardian builds. It also costs 6 experience points, which I'm sure you'll agree is a hell of a lot of experience. If you're saving up the experience to purchase this card early in the campaign, you're going to have to delay the other purchases, which may actually help your deck more in the long run. When I play Guardian, for example, I tend to spend most of the experience points I earn at the beginning of a campaign shoring up their sanity. And getting the jump on a scenario with cards such as Emergency Cash and Ever Vigilance sounds great in theory, but you're going to run headlong into danger during the campaign unless you can survive. Take a look at a deck such as Dadu 13 Sleuth Enforcer, which is one of the highest rated decks over at Arkham DB. Purchasing a copy of the Elder Sign Amulet to help roll and soak up horror is one of that deck's top priorities. I've had a chance to play that deck myself against many of the scenarios in the Path to Carcosa, and the Amulet as well as the deck's slew of cheap allies have been critical to the deck's success. Mobility is also a key in many of the cycle scenarios, so I would make purchasing a copy or two of Pathfinder a top priority too. That's 5 experience right there, and I haven't even discussed Dadu 13's other priorities, which include In the Know, the level 1 magnifying glass, extra ammunition, and a lightning gun. Would a copy of Stick to the Plan make the deck better? Absolutely. I mean, who wouldn't want to attach an Emergency Cash prepared to the worst and a shortcut to it before drawing your opening hand? However, you're going to have to give something up in the short term for that jump start. Personally, I don't think I'd seriously consider Stick to the Plan until I had the Amulet and a Pathfinder or two, but that's part of what makes this game so great, the difficult choices we need to make when we sit down to build a deck. The other point I'd like to make while I'm playing Devil's Advocate is that while Stick to the Plan seems custom-made for Mark Harrigan, I think that of all the Guardians, he's the one who could get away without it, at least in the beginning. When I played Mark solo through the Dunwich Legacy, I was really impressed by his ability to draw through his deck. Sometimes I felt as though I was almost drawing too many cards too quickly, if that's even possible, because I was afraid I'd empty the deck and I'd have to take a horror to reshuffle. Mark's superior draw makes me think I would likely see those 3 tactic and or supply cards quickly anyway, so those 6 experience points may be better spent elsewhere, at least at the beginning of a campaign. You could certainly consider picking up Stick to the Plan later. Alright, I'm going to stop playing Devil's Advocate so I can gush a little bit more about this card. Stick to the Plan is one of the most exciting cards in the pack, if not the entire cycle, because it's really going to open up so much deck building space for Guardians. It can help Guardians solve their resource issues and fetch them a weapon and an enemy so they can start cracking skulls from the word go. And that's just one example. It also allows Guardians to tailor their strategy on a scenario-by-scenario basis, and it lets them get away with running singletons of situation-specific events. So if you need that dynamite blast to take down a boss, no worries, because you can always fetch it at the start of the game with Stick to the Plan. Now, Stick to the Plan does cost 6 experience points, so you're probably going to need to delay or even forego other purchases and upgrades if you want to pick it up early in the campaign. And players are really going to need to decide for themselves whether the jump start from Stick to the Plan is worth the sacrifice in other areas, such as survival. Nevertheless, I'm really looking forward to seeing what players come up with, especially as the card pool expands and we see more tactic and supply cards. Guardians really make off like bandits in this pack. On the Hunt gives Guardians a measure of control over the encounter deck and potentially improves their efficiency. They no longer have to wait for the encounter deck to feed them an enemy, which should really slash their downtime in multiplayer. And Stick to the Plan is simply incredible. It's going to blow deck building wide open for Roland, Zoe, and Mark, and give them a lot more control and flexibility when it comes to their events package. They no longer need to include, 2 copies of certain cards just to make sure they draw them. They can cut down to 1 and include other cards in their deck. Really good pack for Guardians this time around. That is going to do it for my review of the Guardian cards in Black Stars Rise. If you need to contact me, I can be reached at manfromleng@gmail.com. I'm also on Twitter at manfromleng. Until the stars are right, keep your shotgun close and your elder sign closer. Take care out there, and happy investigating.